Thank you. And may just I remind everybody that this is a business meeting and the committee is conducting business, and I would request that everybody act accordingly. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Before you do that, I would like to make a comment. I believe the agenda as it is currently written does not allow for public comment on resolutions 18263 and 18264. Mayor, is this the appropriate time for a motion to allow for public comment after these resolutions are introduced, or would you prefer I move that after the consent agenda items?
I would prefer that you do it when we get there after the consent agenda items.
Okay, so there will not be a problem that it would be asked too late?
No,
before
we'll
we
do the
approve the
consent
agenda
agenda.
as is.
Because you're not, is that a change to the agenda, or is that? No, it's not a change to the agenda.
Okay, so we can do
Right.
it then. Okay, then I will make my motion then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? May I have a motion to approve the September 17th, 2018 Township Committee minutes?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have a Community Service Award proclamation to be presented by Committeewoman Lieberberg. And I'm going to invite up the Community Service Award Committee Chair, Elaine Becker, as well. Oh, she's going to do the proclamation first. I think Elaine can speak.
David Siegfried would like to introduce Karen, our recipient.
Wonderful, thank you.
Karen, why don't you join me? Our community is, I think, rightly renowned for its beauty and character. A large part of the credit for that goes to our civic organizations and our township boards and commissions, and the volunteer members of those organizations who devote so much time to preserve and enhance those qualities. Our awardee tonight, Karen Gaylord, is an outstanding example of those volunteers, both in her years of devoted service and her leadership in those activities. Among other things, Karen has over a decade of service on the Township Beautification League, almost 20 years on the Shade Tree Commission, and she's served multiple terms on the Historic Preservation Commission, many of them as vice chairman.
To the township in 1975, Karen Gaylord has actively served our community and its members in a variety of capacities. Whereas Karen Gaylord has worked with great dedication to preserve and enhance the character and beauty of the township through more than 11 years of service with the Township Beautification League, 4 years as president, multiple terms representing over 18 years on the Township Shade Tree Commission, and more than 16 years as a member of the Historic Preservation Committee, most recently as vice chair. Karen Gaylord has also contributed to the life of our community through service on several parent-teacher organizations, volunteer activities of her church, and volunteer work at the Cora Hartshorn Arboretum in Greenwood Gardens. On behalf of the Township Committee and the residents, on this 4th day of December, we extend thanks and appreciation to you for your service, your selfless dedication to the community, and providing an inspiration for us all. It's official. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Bernstein and the Township Committee, and to the Community Service Tree Award Committee. I would like to thank you all sincerely for this award. When Dave Siegfried called to say I was going to be given this award, I was dumbfounded. I did all these things because I love to do them. I enjoy this type of thing. I have loved this town since we moved here in 1975. and I wanted to do everything I could to keep it as charming as it is. I have dealt with so many township employees who've always been so helpful to me and made whatever I did that much better. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. That's hers. All right, reports.
She'll be sitting in a second.
Committeewoman Lieberberg, do you have any reports?
Yes. So I would like to update our residents. The marijuana legislation the bill has come out of committee. Senate Bill number S-2703 and Assembly Bill A-4497. It's anticipated that these bills could be on Governor Murphy's desk as early as December 17th, but conventional wisdom by the League of Municipalities suggests that there'll be many more revisions, and we should look to early 2019 for a final edit. I will reiterate that we as municipalities have the opportunity to opt out. If we do not opt out, then we are in. And if we opt out, we cannot consider opting in for 5 years. There's some discrepancy on when that calendar might begin, but there's hoping to be addressed at a later date. And as it stands now, the tax on marijuana sales will be 6.625, which is the normal sales tax, plus an additional 5.375 that will go to the state. Some people call it a sin tax. Now, our local government may adopt an ordinance currently it's at 2%, but the New Jersey League of Municipalities believes that that is insufficient for the burden of implementation costs that will rest heavily upon the municipality. The League is recommending somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% should the municipality decide to opt in. Other issues of importance are the funding for expungement and associated costs to modernize the process, to alleviate the burden on our local courts. And I just want to reiterate, please keep in mind that there's 4 different categories of quote-unquote opting in should we decide. It's the growing, the processing, the wholesaling, and retailing. Please keep in mind that as the bill stands now, there will be no penalty for anyone 21 years or older in possession of 1 ounce or less. There will be no public consumption, just like alcohol or smoking in areas. And there will be a state body, regulatory body, made up of 5 members, 3 that will be appointed by the governor, 1 by the Assembly, and 1 by the state Senate. I would encourage my fellow committee members to reach out to their friends and neighbors. I personally have reached out to our Board of Ed and the superintendent, and I'll be speaking with them in the next couple of weeks. We do have a bit of breathing room, but I think it's very important that we be proactive on the topic. Thank you. I have new business. I'll do that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Ms. Egla?
No reports.
Okay. Give me any reports?
No.
Christine?
Just happy to be back.
We're happy to have you. Any reports?
Sure. DMDA update. The first annual DMDA-sponsored Snowflake Stroll took place at the lighting of the Winter Walk in Taylor Park on Sunday, the 25th of November, and was well received by the community. The DMDA also held another ribbon-cutting ceremony this weekend for Work Home, which is a combination co-working space and art gallery, really cool, on Millburn Avenue, right next to Clemens's. And the DMDA thanked them for perpetuating our community's economic development, pride, and spirit. Also, the DMDA has launched a December promotion, the Holiday Gift Card Challenge, promoting gift cards to downtown merchants as the perfect holiday gift. So from now till December 20th, every time someone buys a gift card in a downtown shop or restaurant, they're entered in a daily prize drawing for a $50 downtown gift certificate. So this program kicked off this weekend, and it's been well received, and we've really heard from our merchants how there's an uptick in their sales. Finally, In less happy news, our president, David Sorkin, has told the board that he will not be seeking or accepting a renomination as president when his term expires at the end of this year, and he'll be vacating his board seat at that time. So the board's discussing its leadership options moving forward, and will provide an update at the next township committee meeting.
Thank you.
I also have a statement on hate speech. The township has learned of recent incidents of hate speech in neighboring townships, which have included swastikas and other offensive drawings on the walls of Lawton C. Johnson Summit Middle School, and offensive graffiti at Edison Intermediate School in Westfield, and anti-Semitic graffiti spray painted at Scotch Plains Fanwood High School. I find this to be deplorable behavior that we do not wish to see in Millburn Township. I would like to firmly state that hate will not be tolerated in our township. We must come together as a community to rise above bigotry and hatred. Any expressions of hatred will be referred to the Millburn Township Police Department and/or the the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. Please be vigilant. If you see something, say something. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Levy?
No report.
Ms. Falcon? Alex?
Yes, just a brief report update on the Sustainable Essex Alliance, which is the energy community aggregation program that we've been sort of slowly going through over the last year. This is at the point where they will be putting out the RFP on December 19th, at which time there will be a 30-day review by the BPU, and the RFP will be open on January 19th. That is the current schedule laid out. Again, Maplewood is the lead agency on this. This is where, for those that may not be familiar, where the community as a whole will be placed into an energy aggregation program, and it will be an opt-out program in which your energy for your home will be aggregated unless you opt out specifically from that program. Sort of, obviously the goals of that program are to lower prices for the residents for their energy consumption through JCP&L. There also will be a large green component to that program, and they are also putting forth a part of the RFP that would establish a energy advisors program, which would be paid for with a 0.0006 kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour fee, which is about $2 a resident, which will help put forth energy advisors that will give people advice on how they can do better with their energy efficiency. We'll be posting some information on the township's website regarding the program, and getting a little bit more information out now that it is starting to ramp up towards the RFP acceptance.
Thank you. And Committeewoman Lieberberg and I met with the Springfield mayor and Springfield's township engineer. They just gave us an update that they are moving forward with their determination regarding the Saks building as an area in need of redevelopment. Tomorrow night is their planning board meeting where they're going to be addressing that. After that, they're going to move forward with a residential development. And after that, they're going to be starting to have planning board meetings about that residential development. One of the things that we will be doing is giving some input from Millburn's perspective as to how that will impact us, and we'll go for our asks and see what we can get. On another note, I got a very nice note from a township resident who put in better words than I could, that we are having problems with people putting leaves in the streets, not during their period of time as provided in the Public Works Guide. And we have a lot of narrow streets in this township, so that people are having hard times navigating the streets when leaves are in the streets. So please try to abide by the Public Works Guide. It's clear as to what the regulations are as to when you put the leaves in the streets and when pickup is going to happen. And we would, all residents would appreciate if everybody would mind what the regulations are. George, thank you.
Good evening. Tomorrow, December 5th, State Senate President Stephen Sweeney will be hosting a roundtable discussion on the New Jersey Economic and Fiscal Policy Work Group's Path to Progress report. The county executive extends an invitation to yourself, Mayor, and members of the Township Committee, as well as the business administrator, to attend this session. At that session, the Senate President and members of the workforce group or work group will talk about major fiscal issues facing our state, county, and local municipalities, and how the report's recommendations may help local governments achieve fiscal sustainability. And that will take place at the Essex County Leroy Smith Public Safety Building tomorrow.
What time is that?
That is taking place at 11 a.m. promptly. Other events taking place throughout the county, the Holiday Light Spectacular is in full swing, if you haven't seen the glow already emanating from the reservation. That is free of charge beginning at 5 o'clock, concludes at 9 p.m. Donations of clothing and food are accepted. There's also holiday candlelight tours at Kipps Castle. Those will take place Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Registration is required for the candlelight tour. Those can be you can register online at on the county parks website, EssexCountyParks.org. They also offer self-guided tours during the day. So there's two options there for the Kipps Castle tour, and that is my report.
Thank you. All right, we now have a presentation. Dr. Bruce Eisenstein. Good evening.
Evening.
Yes.
Mayor? Oh, did you want to say something?
Hang on one
Just
second,
by
sorry.
way of background, so people understand why Dr. Eisenstein is here. Back in the meeting in October, it was brought up regarding the potential cell tower at, or an interest in a cell tower at the fire department headquarters. Before going any further with that interest, it was asked to have someone be able to come in and speak directly to what that impact may be, what all that may mean, and give the committee an opportunity to ask questions regarding that. So we enlisted Dr. Eisenstein, and appreciate you being here.
Okay, well, thank you. Mayor, members of the committee, thank you for having me. And to the public, pardon my back, but the way this is arranged, I have no choice. But if there are any questions that come later from the public, I'll be glad to turn around and answer them. I just counted this up, I've made about 400 appearances before zoning boards and planning boards, but this is one of the few times that I've appeared before a township committee. Not the only time, but one of the few times. I also looked through my records, and I was out here in October of 2012 for a hearing on a cell site. So although that's 6 years ago, I'm somewhat familiar with Millburn, and I did look up what's going on. Now, in terms of giving you a talk about cell towers, I'm a professor, and as a result, I have lectures prepared that go 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours. I'm assuming that none of those are the right length for you. The 3 hour one? Okay. I can do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what may be a very obvious overview of what the state of the cell phone systems are. I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what's coming. And then I'm going to talk specifically about a pending application. I gather there's no application now, but there may be an application at the firehouse and what that means. And then I'll be glad to answer any questions from the committee or from the public as well. So at this stage, I think everyone has not only a cell phone, but probably everyone has a smartphone. And if we're going in the direction of our friends in Europe and Asia, most of the people over there have 2 and sometimes 3 phones they carry with them all the time. It's become absolutely ubiquitous. The cell phones that we carry are served by towers that have to be at a sufficient height to reach within the cell, but but of a low power. And I want to emphasize that the towers that you see emit extremely low power. And the reason is that the system is a cellular system. The tower that's put up only wants to communicate with phones that are within the cell. And the cell is fairly small, usually no more than about a mile in radius from where the tower is located, sometimes a mile and a half. But in this area, which is fairly densely populated, it would be about a mile. So you don't get a lot of power out of these things. As a matter of fact, the power is exceedingly small, and the range is very limited. The providers, the ones that we all know about, that's Verizon, AT&T, you have Sprint, you have T-Mobile, are the providers in this area. The providers are under obligation to use their spectrum that they've paid literally billions of dollars for. They're under obligation to use that spectrum, and that means to build out their system quickly. And quickly means that the FCC gives them a timetable, and if they don't build out their spectrum and get the coverage that they want, the FCC can, and in some cases in the past has, taken away their license, and they forfeit the money that they paid for the spectrum. So the providers have a strong incentive to build out their system. They also have an economic incentive in that if they don't have their system built out, they don't get customers, and that's how they make their money. So we have a situation where they're obligated to put up the kinds of infrastructure that they need in order to provide the cell service. But I also understand from these 400 plus hearings that I've been at that frequently the public doesn't like the towers. They don't like them for two reasons. One of them is the aesthetics, and the other one is the perceived health effects. So I can't do anything about the aesthetics. That's not my field. I'm an electrical engineer, and we as electrical engineers don't get into the aesthetics. What I do get into is the infrastructure and the way the infrastructure works in terms of the propagation of the signal. So let me talk first about the site at the firehouse. I have been provided with, I'll show it to the board. I'll show it to the public. You can't see it, but what these things are, these are propagation plots. These are models that the provider puts out that shows where they have coverage, where they don't have coverage. And generally speaking, these things are like the Bible for whether or not there's a need for the site. So let me go specifically to the firehouse site. Around the firehouse site, this is a map prepared by AT&T. What it shows is that they have need primarily to the north of the proposed site, but there also needs to both the east and west, and that would be a gap area. It is not an enormous gap area, but it's a gap area in the sense that there's a lot of residents and a lot of roads in between. I see that you have a copy of this, and unfortunately, in terms of the public, there's no application pending. If there were an application pending, their radio frequency engineer would have to make this available to the public. I requested it, and that's how I got my copies of it. So I know what may be coming. It's furthermore my opinion that if they put this site in, they close a large fraction of the gap, if not almost all of the gap that they're worried about. And that would be on the second sheet that I have here. And the third sheet just shows what it is. So if this were an application before a zoning or planning board, and I was asked for my opinion would be that there is a gap in the proposed site, does a great deal to ameliorate the gap, if not close it completely. So that doesn't mean that it's the best site. It doesn't mean it's the only site. But it does mean that what they would be, if this were going to be the proposal, this would be what it is. Let me turn now to the health effects, because I know this may be a concern to many of the residents and perhaps to the committee as well. So I have to approach this from 2 points of view. In 1996, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, the TCA of 1996. The Telecommunications Act has 3 strict prohibitions that zoning and planning boards and municipal boards such as this one cannot do in terms of the provision of cell phone service. One is they can't ban the service from their community. That's number one. Number two is they can't show favoritism, that is, favor one kind of technology or one company over another. That second one has generally been interpreted to mean that if you allow, hypothetically, AT&T to build a site, you can't say, well, AT&T's here, so Verizon, you don't get a chance to come in. That would be discriminatory. And the third thing, which is perhaps from the viewpoint of the public, the most controversial, is these boards are prohibited from discussing the effects of health or any other environmental concerns. Now, discuss it does not mean that it can't be mentioned. It means that it can't be used as a basis of any decision to turn down a cell tower because of perceived health effects. Now, that's federal law, as I'm sure anyone in here knows. Federal law preempts state law, and certainly it preempts the any laws that would be in the township or the county, for that matter. So, in some sense, we're kind of stuck with the 1996 Telecommunications Act. The Congress further, in 1999, passed another law, which is the Extended 911 law. And that one was both controversial and interesting at the same time from the viewpoint of engineers. What that law said was that if I am on my cell phone and I press 911 on the cell phone, the 911 operator should be able to locate me within 100 meters without having GPS on my phone. That was what the law said. It turns out that that provision was refractory. It was much too difficult, and frankly, the engineers were unable to figure out how to implement that. And since that time, the FCC has expanded, relented, and they're allowing GPS to be used. They're allowing it to be used in conjunction with the towers. But that law still stands that a 911 call, you have to be able to locate the person within 100 meters of where they are when they make the call. I won't go into all the exceptions to that. There are some, but in a community like Millburn, there are no exceptions. That's got to be the rule. What that does is it necessitates not only a certain distance between cell towers, it necessitates a certain placement, because the way you locate people is by a method of triangulation. You need 3 sites and you triangulate where they are. And if the sites are in a straight line, you can't triangulate. And if they're often different distances and not accessible, you can't triangulate. So the effect of the 1999 law has been to force the providers to put in more sites, additional sites. That coupled with the number of users, which has, it doesn't take much imagination to figure out that if you go back 25 years ago, there were hardly any users of cell phone technology. And you go today, everyone has them. Except for my 5-year-old grandson, all my grandkids have their own cell phones and other devices. So the number of cell phones that are around, the number of users has just gone up astronomically. And as a result, that also requires more cell phone towers and more placements. So what the FCC has been doing over the years is they have been chipping away at those restrictions that prevent, that would seem to prevent a cell phone provider from putting up their site. So they've put a shot clock on, for example, from the time, if the provider chooses to invoke the shot clock, from the time they put their application in that's deemed complete, you have 90 days or 120 days whereby the board has to approve it, or the application is deemed complete and a construction permit must be issued. So they've put time limits on these things. I got to tell you that in New Jersey, I was on a couple of these applications that went before a zoning board. They took about 3 years to make a decision. They turned it down at the end of the 3 years, was appealed in the court and reversed in the court. But it took 3 years to make the decision. With the new regulations the FCC has put on, your zoning board or planning board would have 90 days or 120 days to make their decision. It could not go 3 years anymore. It could not go 1 year, as a matter of fact. Now, the providers will often waive their time limit because they want to avoid litigating these cases. But that's the way the rules go. So that's the word that's being used, and the word that you're going to hear going forward in the future is densification. Densification. That comes from the word density, and densification means that you're going to see more and more cell sites closer together. And that's going to be everywhere in the United States with the exception of the wide open areas in Wyoming and Montana and places like that. But every urban area, every suburban area is going to find themselves in a densification mode because of the number of users and because of the demands on the system and the kinds of cell towers they're going to be putting up. Okay, let me now just turn my attention to the health effects and just try and explain as best I can my opinion and that of every engineer that I know is that there are none from the cell towers themselves. None meaning no health effects of any kind. Now let me explain why that is. The power that we're talking about, remember I said that at the cell tower level, they don't want a lot of power. That's absolutely an anathema to them. They want to keep their power very limited so that the signal stays within the cell. As a result, when you look at these drawings, these propagation plots, you look at the kind of power they're putting out, you'll see numbers like negative 85 dBm, minus 85 dBm. Let me explain what that is. That's 3 billionths with a B of a milliwatt. And a milliwatt is 1,000th of a watt. So what we're talking about in terms of power is if you start with something like your microwave oven, which operates at roughly the same frequencies as these cell systems, start with your microwave oven, which is 1,000 watts, and you understand the heating effect of a 1,000-watt microwave oven. You can boil water in a minute. Take that down by a factor of 1,000 to a 1 watt. You could not heat anything with 1 watt. It would do absolutely nothing. Now take it down by another 1,000, and that's a milliwatt. Now take it down by a billion. That's 1,000 million, and that's a billionth of a milliwatt. So what we're talking about is power that is so low that 25 years ago when I was teaching communication students about this, I told them that was an unworkable level of power, that you could not use power that small. It would not be possible to have a communication system working at that low a power level. How can they do it now? It's fairly easy because your cell phone is not really a phone, it's actually a computer. And what the computer is doing is using very sophisticated signal processing technology that allows it to take this exceedingly small signal and make something that you can hear or use or make use of. So as an engineer, when I look at powers that low, and I realize that right now, as I'm standing here in this room, I'm getting perhaps in the range of 10 million times the power of the cell phone towers coming from those fluorescent lights over my head. You're getting 1 million times that power from the cell phone, which is in my pocket. And you don't see people dropping over from fluorescent lights, and you don't see them, well, everyone carries their phone in their pocket, except that I guess the ladies carry it in their pocketbook, so they get it a little further away. Much safer, if you're worried about that. Another consideration that I have is one of epidemiology. And again, this may come as a surprise to many people, but the United States has lagged substantially behind the rest of the world in cell phone technology. Many years ago in the 1980s, I was traveling through Hong Kong, through Israel, through Europe, Germany, Finland. The cell phone density at that time was just unbelievably more than in the United States. That was one of the things, by the 1990s, it was pretty clear that the United States had fallen way behind the rest of the world. And that's what prompted the 1996 Telecommunications Act. President Clinton and the FCC at the time realized that we had to do something to keep us from falling behind the rest of the world, maybe falling apart too. If you go to a place like Hong Kong, which, as I'm sure anyone that's been there will tell you, is exceedingly dense, population is dense, there are cell phone sites on almost every building, on every traffic standard, on every school, and in factories and businesses and offices. They're just all over the place. And they have to be very close together because people use their cell phone when they're walking. Very few people drive there because traffic is so bad. It's a oxymoron, of course. Traffic is so bad because no one drives. The fact is that this has been going on now for 30 years, and if there were any health effects, from an epidemiological point of view, you would see people in Hong Kong dropping like flies because they're using their phone all the time, and their towers are all over the place. So for those reasons, I believe that there are no health effects from the towers. There are some people that worry about the proximity of the phone itself, because in contrast to the tower, which is hundreds of feet away from you, the cell phone itself is right up against your head. And I'm not concerned about that. I don't use earphones or Bluetooth earphones or anything like that, but the Bluetooth signal is the same as the cell phone signal, so I don't think you save anything with that. I'm not concerned about that, but if there were going to be a matter of concern, it would be that the million times greater power coming from the device itself, the handheld device, would be of more concern to me. So with that, Madam Mayor, I will conclude my presentation and open it up for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Do I have questions from the Township Committee? Oh, Mr. Levy.
Dr. Einstein, you don't have any health concern issues based on your studies, but you're an electrical engineer. You're probably aware, as I looked at your CV, you testify a lot in court, that there are numerous cases around the country in which experts have taken a different conclusion, and juries have agreed with them, right?
I'm not aware of them.
There are experts who take a different view of that, and juries have agreed with them, and some courts of appeal have sustained those judgments against towers that, in those cases, particularly in California, plaintiffs allege have led to their cancer.
I'm first of all not aware of the cases, but I can tell you that when the FCC in 1996, when they passed or when they promulgated the Telecommunications Act, it was Congress, of course, that promulgated the act, but the FCC was charged with the responsibility of administering it. They had looked at well over 5,000 studies that were done, and one thing to bear in mind about the effects of electromagnetic fields, especially from broadcast towers, from towers of various types. One thing to bear in mind was that in 1920 or 21, the first radio transmission tower went up. Once again, the same kind of electromagnetic waves that went up. We've actually had 100 years of experience since then. And if you look back at I mean, assuming, and I have no reason to doubt you, that the courts held what you just said. I have no reason to doubt that. It wouldn't be the first time the courts got it wrong, by the way. If you look back at the history, if you just do it from a epidemiological point of view, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, you go back any time you want to, there were 0 cell phone towers and 0 cell phones. Just go back to that period. and now there are hundreds of millions of them. Not cell phones themselves, and in the United States right now, there are 300,000 towers. One would expect that if there was any health effect at all, if there was any cause and effect, that there would be an increase in cancer rates and things like that. No such thing has been found. And as a matter of fact, if you take away, it's actually stayed level. But if you take away the much better diagnostics that we have, for one thing, and the second thing is that people are living longer, and as a result have a greater tendency to develop cancer later in life. If you take this away, the incidence of cancers have gone down, not up. But you would expect that if you have 100 billion or 100 million fold increase in something, you'd see some increase effect if there was a cause and effect relationship.
That's what the carriers argued in the courts too.
It's not the well, that could be, and I don't doubt that. Listen, I've read, if anyone's interested, there's a very good book called Dark Light. I'll just summarize one of the things in the book. It talks about the period when electric lights first came in, and inside the book are pictures of hotels, and on the outside of the hotel it said, "No electric lights. We use only gas lights in this hotel." And that was the feeling all through the early 1900s, because the story was that these electric lights, these Edison lights as they called them, caused cancer. That was the story. There were courts that held that. There were decisions. People were awarded money from places that installed electric lights, and later someone got cancer, they said, from it, and courts awarded money. Obviously, it was all wrong. It was hokey. And point of fact, the gas lights are, of course, as everyone understands, much more dangerous. Now, if you're looking at a trade-off, even taking what you just said, if you think about the number of 911 calls that are made on cell phones today, it's now up over 75% of 911 calls. Think about the people in traffic accidents. Think about the people that are stranded out on highways in the snowstorm. If you don't have the cell phone coverage for them, that is much more dangerous than what we're talking about here, which, frankly, I don't believe.
Well, that's a cost-benefit analysis, which is entirely.
But it's so overwhelming.
Well, reasonable observers can disagree on that cost-benefit analysis.
All right.
But I don't know that you can stand here and say for certain that there's no health benefits. I mean, would you?
No health benefits or health effects?
No health detriments to it. You know, you don't have to answer this question, but I don't know if you'd recommend your son or daughter to have your grandson, your one that you referenced, sleep next to her or his cell phone every single night.
I think they do.
Doesn't mean that you recommend it.
I think what happens is after they're put to bed, they're sitting reading, and as soon as their parents come in, they stick it under the pillow. So I think it's. So I suspect that. I haven't checked that myself.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
Yes. So you said the second big concern is aesthetics.
Yes.
So clearly we don't have an application now. Do you know the difference of the size of the tower we currently have at the fire station to what would be put there when we do get an application?
From what I understand, that they were going to increase the height, and since I don't have an application in front of me, I don't know how much they're increasing the height, and I don't know whether the reason that they're doing that is because of structural concerns on the existing tower. So I'm at a loss here. I would know better when I saw the application, if I actually saw an application in front of me.
And if and when there's an application, then we have public hearings, and if that would be for not like the normal 200 feet away from an application, it would be like community-wide hearing.
Well,
Anyone, right, right, but it would be noticed to the entire town.
that's not what I understand municipal land use law in New Jersey says, but perhaps Mr. Falcon could comment on that. I think you only noticed the 200 feet around the property.
Right,
But the notice is published,
yes.
like it always is.
I mean, you can always put a township notice out. I mean, nothing stops you from doing that.
That's what I was inferring
Sure.
to, right.
Sure.
Go ahead.
And just to answer you, Committeewoman Iglo, I think one of the things that was stated was that it would have to be above the tree line. I'm not sure exactly what that height is, but obviously you have the train embankment and the trees that are on that, and it would have to be above that.
Right.
The one question I had is if a cell provider has a tower and it was located conceivably at this site, are other carriers able to or required to be allowed on that tower?
They are required to provide for co-location, which means that if another provider comes along and says, we want to go on your tower, they're obligated to grant them a lease on the tower at market rates. They can't gouge. And by the way, all the carriers have a mutual agreement among themselves of exactly what the co-location arrangements are. They have it all down, so it's almost automatic. There is a proviso, however. What you said is correct. They do have to be above the tree line, and the plots that I see in front of me were done at a height of 120 feet for the tower. The additional providers have to be 10 feet away. So if you have 120, the next one on would be at 110, next one would be on at 100, and 100 might start getting too low for that provider, and 90 would certainly be too low in this area. So there's often a trade-off that we have in terms of the height of the tower and the need for co-location. But that's something that if I were the consultant to the zoning or planning board, wherever that comes, that would be something that I would advise them on. And that goes to the specific application and the specific tree height and other things around.
Yeah, quickly, I had the good fortune of working with Dr. Eisenstein on behalf of Harding Township when we had a cell tower application there. And this may be a question which is perhaps doesn't need to be answered and most people know, but you referred to a gap. I assume that means an area where you cannot get cell tower coverage, where you're perhaps moving along and then you move into one of these areas where your phone just no longer receives the message, and then you get out on the other side and you can hear again. What exactly is a gap?
Yeah,
How big are they?
the providers would like you to believe that a gap is what you just said, where you can't get cell phone coverage. And if I hold up this this map, you'll see white areas on there, and they'll say the white areas are the gap. Okay, so you see white areas on there, they'll say that's a gap. So it's a tough definition. Interestingly enough, the 1996 Telecommunications Act is actually not an act. It's actually an amendment to the 1934 Telecommunications Act, which was the one that really set in stone the way in which we handle utilities like telephones, television, telegraph. I mean, all these other things were really in the 1934 Act. And the 1996 Act was an amendment to handle wireless communication like cell phones. If you go back to the 1934 Act, the 1934 Act defines something called a grade of service. And the grade of service is a combination of block calls and drop calls. So a block call is when I pick up the phone, dial the number, and it doesn't go through. Dial the number again. By the way, I'm using the word dial, and the people in this room know what I'm talking about. My students have no idea what I mean when I say dial a number. I'm telling you, these are seniors in college. They have no idea what that means. But you dial it again, and maybe it goes through or not. A drop call is when I'm talking to someone and the call drops, either one way or the other. Either I can't hear them or they can't hear me, or both, or it drops altogether. So what the law says is that the combination of those two should be no more than 2%. It's a 2% grade of service. That means that if 1 out of 50 calls doesn't go through, if more than 1 out of 50 calls doesn't go through, that violates the grade of service. So that would define what a gap area is. So it's a level of reliability. Now what happens is when you look at these maps, if you're near the green area, let's say you're in the white area, but near the green area, you'd hardly know the difference. As you get further along, more into the white area, it may actually go to what you said, and that is where you'd be unable to make or receive a call. So it gets progressively worse, but it's a gradual tail off.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any members of the committee? Okay, thank you very much.
Did you want to open to the public?
I could do that, certainly. But do any of the members of the public have any questions? Yes.
Elaine Becker from Brookhaven Way. You know, there's a cell tower in the church on the corner of Millburn and Spring Street, which is a stone's throw, maybe a little more than a stone's throw from the firehouse. So wouldn't there be a lot of duplication there? And,
There is, they're showing, on this plot that I have, maybe I can take it over and just show it to you, okay? Did you ask the question? I'm sorry I don't have anything bigger. I think that that's the one you talked about. There's already a site that they've indicated. I think this is the propagation from that site.
the map has such a huge.
I know.
It's
I'm
quite
sorry
hard
about
to
that. It's
pinpoint it.
not my map, and it's the best I can do. So I think the answer is yes, they're aware of that, and that's propagated already. Propagated meaning that they've taken that into account with the purported gap area. Yeah.
You mentioned that the current power level is something minus 23 decibels or
Minus 85 dBm.
So you mentioned that that was an unworkable number many years ago. Is there any technological advancements coming down the line that you're aware of that are going to change the power levels in the future? Say what the next generation technology is going to be? How is it going to compare to the current?
They're going to be a lot lower.
Do we have a number?
I do not at this point because the standards for the 5G system have not been written yet. But the 5G system, which will be the next generation that's going to come out, will likely be at much higher frequency band. I'm hearing 3,500 megahertz, I'm hearing 6,000, I'm hearing as high as 29,000 megahertz. So with those kinds of frequencies, you get a very, very short range of coverage. Very short meaning 50 to 100 feet in some cases for the higher ones, and probably less than a couple hundred feet. And that's what's going to account for the densification. And that's why they're going to have many more sites. So that's the bad news, there's going to be many more sites. The good news is they're going to be very low. They'll be on utility poles, they'll be on traffic lights, they'll be the size of buildings. They're not going to be things, you're not going to see towers all over. I mean, we look like a pine forest if you had towers all over. But, those powers will be much lower, and then the technology has to be very different. We're using different technologies for the detection of the low power signals and the high frequency signals.
Members of the public, before you ask your questions, could you please just identify yourself? Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Corey Miller. Does the township stand to make any money off of these towers?
Is the firehouse on township land?
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Do you know approximately how much?
Hi.
Like, does it depend on the number of carriers or the number of towers?
So what usually happens is if it's on township land, the township puts out a request for proposal. The providers bid on that request for proposal, and they would have all that in there. They'd say that this is how much we're willing to pay, this is what we'll pay if more carriers go on there, this is, in other words, all that would be worked out, and then the township would decide which proposal they want to accept.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Lisa Bull, Berkeley Road. When the new technology does come down the pipe, is there anything written into the contracts that makes the tower owners responsible for removing these extinct towers?
Okay, two answers. The first answer is the easiest one. The existing towers won't go extinct. They'll still provide what's called umbrella coverage. So they'll be overlaying the whole area because these small cell sites cannot handle moving traffic like a car moving along the street. They're just, it would require too many handoffs one after another. So they still need the what are called macro sites, the ones from the pole, so they don't go extinct. But secondly, again, with every board that I've advised on this, I always advise them to have a takedown provision. And that is if the tower is not used for a period of 9 months, then whoever built the tower is responsible not only for taking the tower down, but restoring the ground to 4 feet below ground level. So, I mean, that's usually built into the zoning board approval.
Anyone else?
Yep.
Mark Stahl, I've seen towers that have been decorated as trees and other sort of aesthetic improvements. Is there any provisions in the law that require
So, that would be in front of a zoning board or a planning board, and what the boards can ask for, and the reason that you've seen it, is the boards say, we want some sort of camouflage. We want something on there that doesn't make it look like an industrial tower. And sure, the providers will, in every case I've been involved in, they've gladly done it. I don't know about gladly, let me take it gladly. They've done it.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Oh, we do have a question.
Oh, another one.
Sorry.
While we have
Right,
this kind
while
of
we have you
expertise
here.
on hand, I think you're familiar with the FCC order of September 26th concerning the small
Keep your voice up.
antenna facilities placements.
Yes.
And I pointed out to you before the meeting, I pointed out to you before the meeting that the committee has on its agenda this evening the introduction of an ordinance to establish reasonable standards with respect to those 5G facilities.
Right.
Do you have any comment with respect to that?
I do, and I'm glad you reminded me. I noticed that you have pending, it looks like 25, 22, 18, licensing of the right-of-way permits.
Yes.
And that's the one that would, and let me explain this to the committee if you don't know this already. I talked about the new 5G system with the higher frequency bands that they be operating at. These frequency bands have very, very small radius of coverage, very small. And as a matter of fact, they're sufficiently small that you couldn't put them on a 120-foot antenna, because by the time the signal got to the ground or got any distance away from the ground, it would be almost a useless signal. It would be way below the power levels required. So what they're doing is, to implement the 5G system, they're going to put in what's called a distributed antenna system, a DAS system, and almost invariably they put these in the right of way. So what the FCC is very anxious to have the distributed antenna systems and the 5G systems deployed, and as a result, they put out a set of regulations that only go back a couple of months. It's September. I have it with me, but I don't remember the exact date. But it was 26th, September 26th of this year. Essentially, what those regulations say is that you can't do anything about it. I mean, that's the simplest way of phrasing it. If they come in and they want to use the right-of-way, you have to let them use it. There is one sentence in the provision that I found. I also consult for Princeton Township, and they were working, and it's not a township anymore, it's the city of Princeton, and they had an application in front of them for about 40 nodes in the Princeton area. And we found that one provision in there that says that if there is an existing ordinance, that local boards can control things like the aesthetics or the look and feel of them. So for example, the way I would interpret that is that if you had a community or a section that was sort of Victorian in nature, you could require them to put up a Victorian-like pole or do something that looked like it fit in with the area. If it was a wooded area, then maybe you could have it look more wooded. So I've been advising all the townships that I deal with that you ought to get a right-of-way wireless provision in there, and particularly concentrate on the aesthetics. What you cannot do, based on my reading of the FCC regulation, you cannot say you're allowed to go in one area of the town but not in another. I mean, they have to lay out their network, and the FCC says you got to let them do it. It's a very, very I want to use the word restrictive from the viewpoint of the rights of the board, the way that provision is written, the way those regulations are written. Notice you have it in front of you, so.
This is the order,
Yeah.
116 pages.
Right. A lot of it, oddly enough, I learned something when I read through this. It turns out that in Indian reservations, there's a whole separate set of laws, and it's not clear that the 1996 Wireless Act applies to the Indian reservations. So what they did is, you'll notice a large fraction of that order has to do with the Indian nations and how they have to respond to this. But they're under the same orders now.
We won't part, but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. The resolutions on the consent agenda are the bills list, the transfer of funds, authorizing the purchase of a Moorbark stamp cutter from the National Co-op, authorize rejection of bids received for interior renovations for Millburn Township Municipal Building, and authorize advertising of bids for the Town Hall electronic signboard and approval of raffle license. So, are there any comments or questions from the public with respect to the items on the consent agenda, or from the Township Committee as well, on the consent agenda items? Anything?
I just want to mention that the town hall electronic sign may not necessarily be town hall, or that it'll be
An electric
an
signboard.
electronic sign,
Electronic
yeah.
signboard, okay. Any questions or comments from the public? No? May I have a motion?
wait,
There was a
the-
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Come up. And identify yourself.
Hi, Marilee Reesbeck, 91 Whittingham Terrace. Could you just explain what the approval of transfer of funds is, please?
Yes, so at the end of the year, we're able to transfer between line items within a budget, but if you have to transfer outside of a particular budget, say it's police or administration or whatever, then you have to do a resolution that allows you to transfer funds if a line item has been overdrawn.
Thank you.
Can you identify, if you have a question, please come up and identify yourself.
Sarit Katz, 11 Fairfield Drive. So just which funds are being transferred? That's all.
Sure. There is funds from EDP, which is our technology line item, being transferred in, and that's coming from salary and wages. Legal is being transferred in to the legal budget from the salary and wages budget of legal. Construction code there is being transferred in from the utilities, natural gas utilities. And then for police salary and wages, there's money being transferred in from group insurance and shade tree.
Okay, so when you look at the next year, when you realign the budget, do you make the adjustments so that certain line items then will be more in line, so you have to do this less often and moving money around, so it could be something that people could be more transparent generally?
Well, sure. I mean, that's always part of the process, but also there are things, unforeseen circumstances that occur that require you to make
Absolutely.
transfers.
Right.
Janet Pizar, Main Street. The last resolution, approval of raffle license, these have come up on agendas many times. I'd like to know, is this limited to nonprofit organizations, number one? And, no, Sal? No? Anybody who wants to run a raffle needs a permit, I know, for a game of chance, and it needs the municipality approval where it's held. Can we always know the name of the entity that is seeking approval for a raffle?
It's on here.
It's always on.
It's always on here.
Well, it's on the resolution.
Yeah, so Summit Speech School,
Got it,
PTO
okay.
Millburn High School, Family and Children's Services, PTO Millburn Middle School, and St. Rose of Lima.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? May I have a motion to approve the resolutions listed on the consent agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second,
Mr. Levy?
Yes.
Ms. Lieberberg?
yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Dahl Eglo?
Yes.
Mayor Verstein?
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda are a discussion and resolutions to consider cancellation of capital account fund balances.
Yes, Mayor, I would like to move that we amend this evening's agenda to allow for public comment on resolutions 18263, and 18264, both of which purposes are to authorize the cancellation of capital fund balances. I'm making a motion for public comment on the following two resolutions.
May I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Levy?
Yes.
Ms. Lieberberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Del Eglo?
Yes.
Mayor Bursting?
Certainly. Okay. So there are two resolutions. One is to, where's the one?
First one is 3.5.
Okay. First one is to, following unrequired balances of capital improvement authorizations, that's for $3.5 million. And the second, and that's resolution 18-263 and resolution 18-264 for $2,368,107. Both of these are for monies that were authorized for complete streets and not being used. So with that, any comments?
Yes, I'd like to speak.
Ms.
First.
Lieberberg?
I respectfully disagree with those that believe it is prudent for Millburn to retire these bonds pertaining to the Complete Streets plan. First, let us remember what the mission statement of Complete Streets was: a comprehensive capital improvement strategy to address pedestrian safety, vehicular circulation, and the economic vitality in our downtown. Rather than walking away from what has been done, as Township Committee members, I believe we have an obligation to our constituents to improve upon what has been created in the most fiscally responsible manner. This does not mean indiscriminately destroying what has been in place and starting over. What it does mean is exploring all and any alternatives. For example, to solve the downtown parking issue, I've proposed a cost-effective way to create more parking spaces in the Dunkin' Donuts lot by changing the entrance of Town Hall and adding diagonal parking on Town Hall Plaza. In addition, I think it's critical that we invest and review and plan a traffic safety measures to improve the Millburn train station drop-off on Essex Street. All these initiatives to improve our community require funding that goes beyond the limits of the town's annual operating budget. At this juncture, the balance on the initial funding of $2.368107 remaining is at a very nominal interest rate. The $3.5 million is essentially a line of credit that has been untapped. There is no interest or costs associated with that sum. If we choose to cancel the bonds in the guise of fiscal responsibility, we will foreclose Millburn's financial obligations in fulfilling the hopes and aspirations of Complete Streets. To those who say we can go back and bond it when we have our future plan in place, I say, why would we do this when a plan is already in place? I believe we must view our roles as public servants, not as politicians. Let's use our elected official status to elevate possibility, not restrict it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Aglo?
I would like to speak as well, Mayor. I believe that these bonds are vital to leave in place to allow for further construction on the Complete Streets project. I find it curious at best that the mayor has chosen to bring forth resolutions that cancel all the remaining funds at this time. I see this as a deliberate and intentional move to delay next year's town committee from being able to do any construction. These funds were approved by the mayor for construction of Complete Streets and are now being canceled by the mayor to prevent any construction of Complete Streets. We still have construction to do, and these funds were approved specifically for this construction. We need to remediate certain portions of Phase 1. We need to work towards safe drop-off and pickups at both of our train stations. We need to synchronize our traffic signals to assure pedestrian crossings are not in conflict with cars. We need to wait for the 2019 Township Committee reorganization to put these committees in place. I would like to complete a thorough evaluation of the project. For this to happen, we need to consult the experts who have intimate knowledge of our town and who were never consulted, such as Millburn's own town engineer, Millburn's own traffic engineer, our town planner, residents like Rich Keller and John Buckholtz, both of whom have donated hundreds of hours of consultation and plans on previous projects in town. None of these people were ever asked to look over what was proposed by Arterial, a firm that had no working understanding of our unique town. We owe it to our taxpayers, if they are residents or landlords, and to our merchants to do a better job with how we choose to move forward. I would like next year's committee to work together to achieve a better outcome, but nothing can happen without funds. To reiterate what Committeewoman Lieberberg said, the $3.5 million bond is like a pre-approved home equity loan. It is costing the town nothing until we tap into it. Why is the mayor intent to cancel this pre-approved line of credit? I ask my fellow committee members to vote no on resolutions 18263 and 18264.
Any other comments? Any other comments from the committee?
Sure. It's just interesting. It's the first time I've actually heard complete streets in a positive light by the prior two commenters. And
Nobody's interrupting you when you speak. I think that it is only appropriate to allow the committee to speak as well. Thank you.
And as I was saying, I think that if we're talking about fiscal responsibility, to, number one, be paying interest on a bond that there's no plans that have been in place to do is not fiscally responsible. And number two, leaving a blank check for the next committee to do what has been rumored to be doing as ripping things up is just not prudent political decision.
Thank you. Do you have anything? So, I have actually given this a lot of thought, and I understand that, and I hope that we move forward with a completed project, whatever it may be. But there is no project on the drawing board right now. And I am very concerned from what I heard over the past 2 years that this money is simply going to be used to rip up what's there. I understand that you're saying you're not going to do it, but I don't know that, and I don't trust that. Secondly, when Jackie and I ran for our positions, there was an outcry about a week before deadline that any money we spend should be decided by the community residents by a vote of a referendum. And in fact, as I recall, Ms. Lieberberg's husband got up there and called us cowards for not voting for a referendum. And so if you want to spend money, and if we as a committee, the 5 of us who will be on this committee next year, decide what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what we consider is appropriate, then we will then gather the funds necessary to do that. We as a committee should own what we do. If as a committee you say, let's reach out to our constituents, let's put a referendum there to see whether people want to spend money ripping up or moving forward. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But from my perspective, as I'm sitting here today, I do intend to move this resolution forward. And however the vote falls out, I don't know, we'll see. So with that being said, I'm going to open up to the public commentary. I am going to ask that you limit comments to a couple of minutes, keep them short, and try not to repeat what everyone else is saying. So please come up. You can actually line up if you'd like, because I presume there's going to be a bunch of you who want to make comments.
And can I respond to your comment, or is that after public comment?
Why don't we have public comment first? Thank you.
Janet Pizar, Main Street in Millburn. Nobody can say that the Complete Streets project has not been very controversial and very, very heated. And for those people who have been on the pulse of this project from the very, very beginning, and I'm talking about documents in archives that go back 10 years, almost 10 years, to May 6th, 2009, when the issue of pedestrian safety was at the forefront of everybody's mind. And that is because there were repeated hits of pedestrians in the road, and there were fatalities as well. So I had done an archive search. I wanted to review everything that had been brought up at township committees in the past and the course of progress of how it came to the Complete Streets project. I'm not going to go through everything tonight. I'm going to take two out of chronological order, and I'm taking it out of the context of everything. But I want to start with November 11th, 2009, 9 years ago. Just days after a fatal car accident, a pedestrian pushing a stroller attempts to cross the street, several vehicles speeding by. Residents will meet today with township officials to discuss measures to increase traffic safety in the neighborhood. This is particularly pertinent. It's February 26, 2015. Ad hoc group studying pedestrian safety. The frequency of pedestrian and motor vehicle collisions at the intersection of Main and Essex Street, including the fatal accident on February 3rd, as well as Main Street and Millburn Avenue, is indicative to township resident Gennaro Ramo that there is a big problem. Mayor Tillotson established an ad hoc team of representatives from the Public Safety Department, the Environmental Commission, the Engineering Department, the Downtown Millburn Development Alliance, township members, Deputy Mayor Burke and Deputy Mounting, as well as a hired consulting firm. May 7th,
Don't forget you have a limited amount of time.
Yes, I do. Last one. May 7th, 2015. There is a strong interest from the public in infrastructure improvements in order to make our streets safer. I'll leave it at that for tonight, but for any allegations that come forth that this was too expedient, that it eliminated constituencies in this town, that it was frivolous in any way, can be challenged by what was recorded in the item of Millburn and Short Hills from May 2009 to 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak?
Mark Stahl, Windermere Terrace, just have a couple questions of information. How were the original funds arrived at? By what process? I'm new to the resident of the town, so I wasn't aware of this process. And if these funds were released, what would be the process by which they would be reacquired should the streets project be advanced?
Okay, so the funds were authorized through a capital ordinance or bond ordinance.
That was passed by this committee?
Not by this particular committee, but a committee previous, in which that then sort of authorizes the funds, and then there is a process in which those funds are issued once a project is slated and you go out to bid and you have a project to do. If these funds were canceled at this point, the process would be the same in subsequent years, in which funds would have to be authorized through a capital or a bond ordinance so that they could then be issued and expended.
So would that be, is there an excessive time frame or an excessive burden on the committee that beyond, I mean, I'm trying to understand, I understand the controversy and that there's a controversy behind the streets itself, but I'm trying to understand the controversy behind this particular ordinance. The way you describe it does not sound like it's causing a sufficient hindrance to the committee should they decide to proceed with new actions. Is there any reason that one is that we would strongly prefer keeping the funds or canceling the funds if the reissuance is the move forward of the committee?
So the voting process on capital funding is such that when it is introduced, the capital or bond ordinance takes a three-person vote, a simple majority.
Mm-hmm.
When it is read at its second reading and public hearing, it takes a person vote or a supermajority.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hi, Leah Cruz, 39 Whitney Road. About how much does it cost to implement a capital ordinance? So if this is canceled and this has to be redone, how fiscally irresponsible is it of the township committee to have us have to do that over?
I don't have the exact figure, but you would have to pay your bond counsel to write that bond ordinance.
And do you have any idea how much that is?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that figure. But I don't have it.
No clue, no idea.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Merrily Respect 91 Whittingham Terrace. What interest rate are we currently paying on the outstanding balance on the first bond?
2.5%, which equals about $59,000.
Okay, and so I assume since we're talking about paying interest on this, that we have borrowed the entire amount on that bond, right? So
Of the original 8.2, that's correct.
right. Okay, so the remaining 2.6 million is sitting in an account somewhere,
Correct.
earning how much?
Well, I don't know how much interest it's earning.
You don't know
but
what percentage of interest it's earning.
No. Not off the top of my
But
head.
but one would think with a couple
don't know
million
that it's gonna-
dollars that it's probably earning at least 2 something, right?
I don't know that I would say that. And the reason I'm not commenting on it is because I don't have the exact figure.
Okay. I think it would, I mean, it would seem to me that that would factor in here. I mean, if we are borrowing at a 2.5% and we're earning 2.5% back, then it's revenue neutral, right? So it's kind of not costing us anything if that's the case. So I would be curious before you make this decision about that. And I'm also interested, Mayor, that you bring up the referendum that so many of us were so interested in previously, and kind of bringing that up as like that maybe we should do that. Why all of a sudden is that something that you advocate for?
You may forget that that was given to us within 10 days of when the due date was, without any opportunity to really give it any thought. So in my opinion, at the time that you did it in 2017, not you, but it was presented in 2017, it was completely untimely, and if it was something that people wanted to do, it should have been addressed 2 or 3 months prior so we could have really vetted it, thought about it, and written it properly. That's why. So whether or not I thought it was a good idea or a bad idea, or whether I think it's a good idea or a bad idea now, is totally irrelevant, because it wasn't timely then, and now I'm just saying if it was good, if for a part of the project that was approved already, that was insisted upon by a certain group of people, why, when they want to spend the money, it's not. That was my point.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. I also would like to bring up, we had a individual just bring up safety, and as that being an initiator for this project. I would like to remind the committee that a woman was killed 2 weeks ago here in town, in the area that many of us are advocating for some safety measures on Essex Street around the train station, and I believe she was hit by a car on Lackawanna Place. So if anything, there should be some initiative to look at the safety there. We should be looking at putting up fencing, the way Maplewood just did and Summit has put up. All of that costs money. So it seems to me that rather than go through the process of having to reapply for money or whatever, why not leave at least the 2.6 million there, even if you remove the line of credit for the 3.5 million? It only makes sense that we are going to have to do something. Clearly, we have issues there and other areas in town, particularly around the train stations. It really does not make sense to me that we would cancel a potentially amount of money that might even be not costing us anything at this point, depending on the amount of interest that we're earning and paying on it.
Which is
Thank
one
you.
of the reasons that I separated out the two bonds.
Okay,
The two
thank you.
amounts. Please.
My name is Wolfgang Zitzers. I'm at 83 Locust Avenue. So just at the risk of repeating or reiterating what has come before, am I to assume?
I'm asking you not to
To reiterate, am I correct in saying that there has not been a cost-benefit analysis actually performed on canceling and potentially reissuing versus keeping these bonds in place?
Correct.
And but this is supposed to be a fiscal decision, right?
Among other things, correct.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Somebody can come up and ask that.
Not to say that I'll respond.
That's your choice, Mayor.
Sarit Katz, 11 Fairfield Drive. So we don't know the cost of the attorney for the rebonding. We don't know what the money is earning in interest now while it's sitting there. And we certainly don't know what the interest rates, which are currently climbing and higher now, would be if we were to rebond. So clearly, and we know that no analysis has been done, no cost-benefit analysis. So if clearly fiscal isn't the issue, fiscal responsibility isn't really the issue. So Mayor, you said among other things, what are the other things?
I guess it's just your definition of fiscal responsibility. So yeah, fiscal responsibility is the main driver here.
But you said among other things, so what are the other things?
The other things are what I would say the good of the township.
The good of the township?
Considering the township as a whole, yes.
Why, in what way? What do you mean it's for the good of the town?
We're not having a conversation.
No, we're
You
not
wanna
going to have a
make it- no.
conversation.
If you want to
Okay.
make a statement, feel free, sorry.
All right. Well, so repeatedly you talked about this idea that people just want to rip it up and use this money to rip it up. But actually, the campaign was not run on ripping it up. The campaign and previous campaigns were run on re-examining and looking for fiscally responsible and cost-effective ways to ameliorate some of the worst elements of the current project. And there are bad elements, and some of them can be addressed, hopefully in a reasonably cost-effective way, but funds are necessary. All of a sudden, it seems like this has to be done in the lame duck, and that seems really unfair. There have been elections. You said, Committeeman Levy, I remember when the referendum was at issue, you talked about you don't want to govern by referendum. People are elected. They're elected to govern, and that was your position. We have had, and I think people said, including you, Mayor Burstein, we don't need a referendum. We have elections. We've had elections. We've had repeated elections. We've had an election in which Committeemen Bork and Mount were voted out of office. We had an election in which Committeeman Tillotson was voted out of office, and now we just had a recent election voting Committeewoman Rosenberg out of office. And the reason being on all these elections is because these people kept pushing this project. Now the town, in election after election, has spoken, and the townspeople have said they want to re-examine this. They want to look at it, and they want to address the worst problems of it. They don't necessarily want to go full force out and go do all the rest of the town, but they also don't necessarily want to rip it all up. So saying that, well, this is rumored, and therefore we want to make sure that doesn't happen, that's basically sticking a finger in the eye of the voters who voted year after year after year. It's not right. If this should be done, then delay it until the new committee comes in, and not do it in the lame duck. It's not appropriate. It's unfair to the voters who've spoken repeatedly. And take another look at this in January. Thank you.
Fran Feld at 948 Ridgewood. I didn't bring a prepared statement. I didn't write a letter this time to read to the editor. You know, as somebody who's been a financial journalist for 25 years, writing for financial trade publications like Institutional Investor, Plan Sponsor, and others, I have an MBA, and I'm just throwing that out there just to say that it's really appalling to decide to cancel a bond when we don't know the particulars. And we certainly, the best guess right now is interest rates are going up, and we have to look at what will that do to having to go back out into the market again and bring in a bond. How much will that cost the town? And if we already have done that, and we have the money sitting there, perhaps earning interest, we don't know how much interest, we don't know the interest rate, we don't know what the interest rates are going to be. There's so much uncertainty here that if I was writing this up for an article for a magazine, it would be pretty scathing about what you guys are doing right now, financially. That's all. Thank you.
Good evening, Richard Wasserman, 24 Inverness Court. And, you know, Mayor, I do want to point out that previously you had agreed at some point to have an ad hoc, you know, on safety and traffic that would be working on this problem. And I want to say that, you know, this latest election was a culmination of a lot of different factors, but you reneged on that. And this election kind of answered that. And there was a survey, and from what I understand, the survey was very strongly against, you know, the survey was very much against complete streets. It pointed out a lot of issues. That survey was never publicized properly, and there was an election. And I kind of feel like this whole thing has been in bad faith, and the people have spoken, and there seems to be a consistent detachment from this committee over what the people want. You know, our citizens, maybe there's a different direction that this town wants to go in. And I think it's really in bad faith for you to cancel this money. Potentially, this is going to cost the township tens of thousands of dollars to rebond this money. And it's really not in the town's interest to do this. And I'm sure there's fees. I'm sure if you cancel this money and the town has to reapply for this money, there are fees and there's a much higher interest rate that is going to be paid to rebond this money. So this is being done in bad faith, and this is going to be part of your legacy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello there, Jake Garfinkel, Addison Drive. I would just like to say that I've heard a lot of negative comments, and I'd like to comment that I'm a senior in Millburn High School, and I'm very interested in politics. So I took a look at the election data, actually, just to look at it, and I've heard people talk about a mandate. What's interesting is, you know, over these last few elections, what they've really failed to differentiate is that the people who were elected out of office happen to be Republicans. And if you look at the data for the town, nationally, they're on par with how the 16 districts and mail-ins voted in terms of for the Republicans and Democrats. So partisanship is something that we're ignoring here in an issue like this. And for people to claim that there's a mandate seems kind of presumptory when there's other issues at play. So I just wanted to comment that because I think that's information that wasn't discussed. If, you know, the town would like a mandate on what the citizens of Millburn would like, I think that'd be a great opportunity to then look at that money. Because if you're going to look at that money, right now there is no mandate. They may claim to have a mandate, but there is none. If you want to look at that money, you then need the voice of the people, right? So what that implies is you're going to look at that money, and you're going to then, with the will of the people, through a vote or referendum, not through a partisan election, you're going to have to take that money and then put it to a project, with a formal plan, of course. Because I also have not heard a plan. I've heard the word fencing, and I've heard safety, and I've heard using the funds. And of course, yes, that requires funds, but it doesn't seem like there's a $5 million plan in place yet. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Dave Boyko, 30 Farmstead Road, hardworking taxpayer. Not to reiterate what others have said, but it's a bit appalling that you bring a measure for fiscal responsibility when you have no fiscal analysis to back it up or to do the cost-benefit analysis. And you do it in a lame duck session after an election in which Complete Streets was once again voted against by the will of the people. It's really an appalling measure of poor governance.
Thank you.
Debbie Fox, 78 Mountain View Road. I mean, it's a new America and it's not a good one, but we don't need to follow what is going on in Washington. This is not a dictatorship. The people have spoken. You have no answers for us. You don't know the interest that that we're paying. You don't know what we're making on it. How can you just push this through? It's a disgrace. Please, I mean, don't do this.
Thank you.
John Scharf, 11 Hawthorne Road. I have to admit, I never liked the complete streets. I always thought it was a fiasco. But it's been a couple of years. There's no other plan that's stepped forward. There's nothing been done. There's no alternative. I could say, dealing with retailers all the time, a renewed downtown may or may not, probably not, renew business because we live in the days of Amazon and Walmart.com. And I'm sure people here would tell you that they probably ordered more from Amazon than going downtown. The town kind of looks a little odd. It's kind of channeling Las Vegas more than it's channeling something unique and charming as successful towns in the area. The lighting is, that big lighting, Millburn Avenue, is Las Vegas Boulevard. That's the sign. There's nothing really charming of it here. It was a terrible solution, but I've seen the same solution applied to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, to a dozen towns throughout the country. It does nothing for downtown business. It does nothing for downtown business because people don't shop. There's three kinds of businesses that do survive in this kind of environment. One of them is food, because you're going to eat food locally. The other one is services. And we have more nail salons than we could shake a stick at. And the third one is unique product with services. Outside than that, it's really a tough business environment. So I don't know what the objective is. I don't know what the plan is. There's been 2 years of bellyaching about complete streets. I have not seen a plan to look at. I was an architect for 26 years in New York City. I've worked on these kind of projects. I know what's involved, but I don't see anything. I don't understand what the money is going to be used for. So it would have behooved everybody to come up with a plan rather than say, save the money and we'll spend it somehow. Where is the plan? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sarah Sherman, Greenwood Drive. I have no voice. I wasn't planning to speak. But I really have to ask, why are you doing this now? This makes little sense to me. I would very much be supportive of some kind of committee that re-examined this project. And I think that what I'm hearing here is something that is reactive and not proactive. Why now?
Thank you.
Mark Stahl, 66 Windermere again. I heard some suggestions that there was a mandate for change. I've heard some suggestions that this was a wave election, that the mandate isn't actually there. The question I guess I have for you is, if we choose not to pass this bonds, or if you choose not to pass this bonds, I guess, what provisions are in place to guarantee that, should we go forward, that we'll be sure that the actions that are taken, whether it's changing something or proceeding or coming up with a new plan, will have a mandate? What procedures are in place to make sure that the public will have an actual say in the next phase of the development of Millburn?
I presume that whoever is going to be sitting in this chair next year will make sure that there is public input, substantial public input, and I presume that... I'm sorry. I said that I'm presuming that whoever's going to be sitting in this chair next year will be looking very much toward having a substantial amount of public input in whatever the next, going forward, looking back, looking forward, whatever it may be. So, excuse me, you know not to shout. I mean, this is like every meeting you're here. All you do is shout from the back. That's not true, Cheryl. Okay. No, I'm tired of being lectured by you, Sarita. It's not you. Excuse me. Someone else is speaking.
Sorry. I was trying to hear what provisions and how the system will work in order to make sure that there's sufficient public input and public, not just public input, but the word mandate has been bandied around, and I think it's a little bit overstated. And I'd like to know what provisions there are to make sure that there really is some agreement. Because I'd personally like to see some development of this town. I get off that train station and I'm kind of appalled at what I see. And I, have been pushing for curb cuts in the neighborhoods I was living on and bump outs for years to make pedestrian traffic better. And so I'm not exactly sure what these issues that people are. I'm new to the town, as I said, that people are up in arms about. I would like to be of a place I can get off at the train and go to a restaurant and meet my family. And I can't do that now in a very good way. And that, so I'd like to know that mandates are actually going to be achieved, or at least going to be attempted to get something.
So the process will be, whoever's sitting in this chair will create a process. That's really what, because there really is no process in place as you sit here today. Whoever it is that will create a process.
Mm-hmm. May I speak?
Sure.
Thank you. We would hopefully have 5 committee members who will be working together. This was a very rough few years, but no matter what we choose to do, we have to have the funding in place. Even if we want to hire...
That's not addressing his question.
It is, Mayor. We have to be able to work together. We need to have a committee and bring in our own people. The history, I'll give you a quick summation. When this plan came before us, well, I wasn't on the committee, our own town engineer, our own town planner never even saw the plans. Now, there was some public outreach. It's questionable on who saw what, and did the pictures ever look like the finished product? I don't believe they did. I don't think I would be argued against that. We need to work together. We need to have a consensus. But it does take 4 votes to bond. And if we have this type of reaction for spitefully deciding not to move forward something that isn't because they don't like the new people who are sitting up here, we may have a real problem. But if we have 3 people who agree on something, no matter who those 3 people are, it'd be a lot easier to move forward with a train station plan, to look at some of the problems that people have complained most about from this construction.
Well, you're talking about how it would structurally be easier for the committee to move, for the township committee to move forward, but I guess what I'm wondering about is how do we make sure that the actual mandate of the people is respected?
Well,
well,
that's going to be difficult.
Because, like I said, I think there was a very interesting comment the young man made that, like I said, there are other factors in play that are going on in the world, and not everything is decided on the streets. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I don't know what people voted for because I didn't actually.
Right. So hopefully there'll be a grassroots working towards whatever the work will be, as opposed to a top-down, but a bottom-up.
Hopefully.
Yep.
A committee that will be formed, that will take more interest involved.
Yeah, I think he's...
I would just like to say that there was a,
It's public comment right now. So let's...
Can't she answer his question?
There's not a question now, so...
So I'll ask a question. I never said there was a mandate, but my question is, his question, how are we going to have more input from the community? When I've been watching the elections for the last several years, so the questions that have the campaign has been run on issues, especially complete streets, has been the main issue in every election in the last 3 years. And the suggestion that's been coming forward is to have an ad hoc committee. It is something that you, Mayor, agreed to prior to your reelection, but then once you were reelected, you ignored that.
I chose not to.
You chose not to do it. You chose not to form an ad hoc committee of townspeople, including the planner, the town engineer, the traffic engineer, et cetera, even though you campaigned on that. But that's a good way to get the input of the people, would be to have an ad hoc committee. And that is something that people have been asking for vocally, repeatedly for several years. Why has no plan been put in place for the last couple of years? Because the Township Committee has been paralyzed because there have been factions. Now, we finally got together enough people and with the incoming majority to put together a plan. So why tie their hands? Why do it now? At the very least, undertake the cost-benefit analysis of what it would cost to pay this back versus what it costs to just leave it in place, and just put it forward in January.
Sorry, Jay Garfinkel, Addison Drive. I'd just like to make a brief addendum because I have the data right now. I'm going to be releasing this. Okay. So it's the 16 electoral districts from the last election, just to add figures to my words. If you look at the 4 highest districts that voted for Menendez and Malinowski nationally, those 4 districts also voted, those were 4 of the 5 highest voting districts for the Democratic candidate. If you look at the lowest voting districts for Malinowski and Menendez in the town, those are also the lowest voting districts for the Democratic candidate. The actual largest break in the demographic is in District 1, the downtown, which was moderately Democratic but high for the Democratic candidate. And most other districts that broke with the demographic trend include moderately high Democratic districts that voted for the Republican candidate. So the balance of districts that voted against the demographic were actually in favor of the Republican candidate. What this means is that the partisanship helped Democrats, helped Republicans, but those who broke with partisanship actually favored the Republican over the Democrat in terms of breaking with the trends. So I'll be releasing the data, of course, but it makes more sense if you're looking at it. But I just want to clarify that, the election was not a mandate on the issue.
What's your point?
Okay, no, hold it, stop. No, wait, okay. Let us, what your point isn't really necessarily appropriate, but let's just let the public comment finish, and then we'll close the public, and then anybody who wants to make a comment from the committee can then make a comment. So let's try to just keep it. Hold your thought. I'm sorry, Sam, but just hold your thought. It'll just go faster. Thank you.
If I may I just show Ms. Eglo, she asked me what my point was?
No.
Okay.
Alyssa Sutton, All Media Consultants. I own a business in town. I live in town, 75 Mountain View Road. Sorry to the gentleman who just moved here. This actually used to be the most idyllic special town that I have ever known, but it just isn't anymore.
It's still a special town.
It's special, but it isn't. There are too many people's egos getting in the way of the reality of what the people want, and they don't want this Complete Streets moving forward in the form it is today. They want it to be relooked at, and to have the mayor come forward and want to remove these funds is vindictive. And it's just wrong, because in a couple of weeks you're not going to be in that chair, and it's going to be a different world. However, I may want to add that there has been some information that has been floating around about, we all know that the fire trucks and the emergency vehicles, as they try to get through the Complete Street area of town, get choked and takes at least, could be 30, 40, 50 seconds, could be a minute more to get to an emergency place. Well, I don't know if you are familiar with Paradise, California, where they also put Complete Streets in. They are now actually saying the people who were evacuating in Paradise, California died en route out because the whole town was so choked and they couldn't get the people out timely. So this Complete Streets is much bigger and much more potentially dangerous than just someone trying to get to the Millburn Deli or to the movie theater. This really needs to be paused. The money needs to be paused, not diminished, and it needs to be looked at by professional people who can help the town come up with a fiscally responsible plan.
I'm Andrew Wood from 8 Horan Circle. Quick question for you. Do we still have Complete Streets on the books, right? I think Phase 2 is still active. Is that not right? Yeah, that is the plan of record for this committee. So you have to cancel Complete Streets. You can't cancel the bonds. I don't know, Mr. Falcon, if that's the case, but This is a plan that's in place from this committee. You have to fund your plans.
Excuse me, hi. BB Shear, 101 Oakview Terrace. Don't usually talk about complete streets, and I didn't really come up here tonight to talk about complete streets. I'd like to talk about democracy, and I'd like to start out by thanking Committeewoman Rosenberg for all she has done in her work here on the Township Committee, and all of you for all the work you do every day. But for an outgoing majority to try to control the incoming majority, no matter if it's a wave or what's the or the other word, or mandate, that is fundamentally undemocratic, and it's a bad example for our township students, for everybody. However, this election came down, it was an election, and in our system, we have to move on and let the new majority do what they believe is best to do. No one really knows well, I shouldn't say that. On my issues, I know what's the best thing to do. This doesn't happen to be my issue. So I would ask you, all of you, and especially you, Mr. Levy, because I think this may be up to you, to think about democracy here. We see on TV in some of these Midwest states that now have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, how the Republican legislature is trying to hamstring the new government. We don't want that here in Millburn Township. This isn't, Alabama or even the right-wing sections of the Midwest. So I would ask that you please think about democracy before you take a vote on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cohn. I live off Mechanic Street. Okay, I've been here, this is my 6th year here, and when I moved here, I have a lot of friends all over New York City and all over the country. I'm an old lady, okay? But what I will tell you is that everybody has had such great things to say about Millburn. Oh, you're gonna love it, you're gonna do this. Oh, it's such a great town and everything else. Do you know that even local friends don't wanna come here? They wanna stay away. They don't want, can we meet somewhere else? The traffic is crazy, it's ridiculous. It's just a hassle. I babysit, and I have parents in Livingston who don't want to come down to dinner here anymore. They go elsewhere because it's just a hassle to get in and to get out. It's not even, they don't even talk about the parking. It's just like, oh, we're going to go somewhere else. No, we're done. We're done there. Okay? I just feel like I haven't seen that part of the town. I'm not against the town. I would love to see the money be held for the next board to come to terms with what has to be done. It's going to take a while. It's not going to be turned over in a second. Life doesn't work that way. But at the same time, there's new people, and it doesn't mean new people. I don't know who anybody is, except that, everybody says, oh, this and that. And I can't imagine that anybody would just dig up the streets and spend the money to dig up what has been done, because there have been some great things done with the complete streets. I mean, it is pretty. Lights are pretty, and it's a nice place to walk around. However, I'm more hurt because it's hard even to get out of the side streets by ShopRite. It's impossible. I now know that I can't go up Mechanic Street. I have to go Ocean because that little bit of half a block gives me an extra chance to get out. Where if I try to get out in the morning or in the afternoon on Mechanic, impossible, because the traffic is all backed up. And I'm begging people to let me through, But I think that I'm just saying that I would love it to be the town that everybody told me it was. Okay, I don't feel that. Okay, and I just want to tell you I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying I'd love to hear how everybody is talking about the old town. And people even have talked about, oh, let's get the town back to the way it was. To me, that doesn't make any sense because I probably was here when it was back to the way it was. But it's such a change, and it's scary. It's scary that it's a change. This is not particularly to any one person. Mayor, I hope you understand that. I have no idea, really. We've never met. I just feel that if there's any way that those funds could be left to just get to the structuring and the discussions of what may come up to, if not remedy, something new may come up, you know, without spending all of it. You know what I'm saying? You know, there's got to be somebody who can together do something different. But I thank you for letting me talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
It is so interesting to hear people come up and talk about democracy and to talk about the majority on the township committee making the best decision that they can, because that's exactly what was done when Complete Streets Plan was adopted. I just want to re-report on 2 articles that addresses the chronic allegations that there was exclusion of some constituencies in this town. This is the article September 24th, 2015. At the September 16th Township Committee meeting, members of the Millburn Short Hills Chamber of Commerce weighed in with their own concerns and suggestions regarding the Complete Streets proposal. This one is very, very pertinent. January 21st, 2016, titled, "Downtown Merchants Look Forward to Complete Streets. Mall is still main competition. New businesses and eateries are coming into town." There was no exclusion. For any of those who were unaware, who did not participate, who had no interest, who were too busy at the time, because you were unaware doesn't mean it didn't happen. This was a very comprehensive process. It went on and on. I can pull out articles about how many township committee meetings there were.
You speak to the
I'm sorry, township committee meetings there were. There was a presentation outside of Millburn Deli. They had far, far more meetings about Complete Streets than was legally required. There was no oversight. It was not hastily adopted, and there was no exclusion. If there was exclusion, it was because people excluded themselves. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Tara Purpose, 206 Millburn Avenue. So Cheryl, I sent you this email today, and I'm going to read it, just so that we can all know where I stand. As if, in case you don't know me, I'm going to be your new township committee woman. So in January, in January, I will be sitting on this board. So, and I'm just going to read it as I wrote it to Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. I know you have no reason to trust me. Oh, the title of it was Reason to Keep the Remaining Borrowed CS Funds, and I had no intention of reading this tonight.
I actually haven't seen it.
Okay. Oh, great. This is our moment, Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know that both you and Sam have made plenty of assumptions about me. It will only be through my actions that you will see my intentions and values. I want what is best for our town, and to me that includes addressing some of the areas of the downtown that were not touched by Complete Streets, Phase 1. Here is a list I sent to Sam. I also communicated with Sam. I'm hoping that we can use the remaining money from the borrowed bond to get some of these things done. I have no attachment to any particular order and believe we need buy-in from our community in a bottom-up approach. That means all of you. Yes. Sorry. Lots of conversations to be had and plans to be agreed upon before anything starts. We need to start building consensus, compromise. 1. Evaluate the Millburn train station drop-off, addressing safety concerns. 2. Evaluate the intersection of Glen and Lackawanna, addressing safety and traffic concerns. 3. Upgrade Locust Grove parking lot, addressing parking issues. 4. Evaluate Upper Millburn Avenue, addressing safety, traffic, and parking concerns. Number 5, connect lots 1 and 2, addressing parking concerns. 6, evaluate the entrance to Taylor Park off of Millburn Avenue and find ways to make it more accessible and inviting with lighting and reconstructed non-asphalt paved paths. Number 7, revitalize Taylor Park. I do believe we need to reevaluate the completed phase 1 of Complete Streets, and I will advocate for a balanced and fair ad hoc committee made up of professionals and stakeholders from all sides. I do think that while we are in the reevaluation mode, we also need to keep moving forward with other parts of the downtown that we can all agree need attention. Before you vote to return the unused monies, I hope you will take into account my requests. As I asked of Sam, perhaps you can at least delay the vote until I am sitting on the dais with you in January. Instead of returning the funds, let's work together to address some of the pressing issues in the downtown. Thank you for your consideration. See you in closed session. Tara.
Thank you.
I know that we just went through a really hard campaign year. Lots of things were said about me that did not come out of my mouth. I do not advocate ripping anything up. As one elected official to another and to another, I can assure you that that is not my plan. Please do not take away these monies. We are going to work as a committee together starting in January, and we are going to do good for this town together. If you take away the monies tonight, that is going to delay the process, hindrance the process. Let's move forward together. I'm asking you, please. And I'm asking you for my trust that when I get up on here on January 3rd, I'm not voting to rip out flex parking. I give you my word. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public? Okay, so, okay, so public session is closed. So now, back to this committee. I know, Ms. Lieberberg, you want to make a comment?
I just want to add that that under your tutelage and direction, we completed a community-wide survey, and at that juncture, we polled both members of the community as well as outside members of the community. After the results were tallied and tabulated, then we had what I believed was a pretty strong sample size of both community and non-community members. Then we took, some members of the committee took umbrage with the process that survey was taken. So I think you were able to garner a significant sample size of what the community wanted during that time. And I feel that to ignore that input and that community participation is really unconscionable. Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments they want to make? Mr.
Yeah,
Reedy?
sure. I just wanted, I'm not pontificating about voting and those kinds of things, but some of the members in the audience had some questions that I wanted to respond to. One of the, forget your name, but who's new to town, asked, about a mandate and what history exists in this town with regard to complete streets and things like that. You don't have to take anyone on this panel's word for it. There was a lawsuit by a resident, by two persons, a resident and another person who I'm not sure is a resident, and that lawsuit was taken down the route of a summary judgment motion, and the New Jersey Superior Court issued a very lengthy decision walking the reader through the entire history, because the lawsuit had something to do with the extent to which the public was involved in having a voice on complete streets, among other things. And the summary judgment decision, I would urge those who care about these things to examine it. Walk the reader through the history of complete streets in the numerous public meetings, the numerous presentations, both by experts and by the then Township Committee, and by others, in which the town was not only invited to participate in sessions over, I think, the course of more than 12 months, but actually did participate. And again, don't take my word for it, read the decision, because it's laid out in factual context with references to exhibits. Also, on the same issue of mandate, I think the most eloquent thing that I've heard on this issue came from the high school student, and I forget your name, but he relied on, to make his point about a mandate or a lack of a mandate, on hard data, which those who frequently attend these meetings know that that's something that I care more about. But excluded from that data is the fact that Mayor Burstein was also reelected last year. And so to the extent, and she's often challenged, including tonight, as a voice in favor of completing complete streets and not ripping up parts of complete streets, she's often challenged, as she was tonight. And so the public reelected Mayor Burstein. And so, you know, it's difficult for, I think, the public to say that there's some kind of mandate here, because there isn't a mandate. And that assumes that the only issue on the minds of the voters, all of which were Republicans who were thrust out of office, was complete streets. There's been no survey or referendum or any data to support that either. Also, just one final comment with regard to future committee woman Prupus. We did meet, very nice meeting, and went over a number of issues, and I asked Ms. Prupus to assure me, because it was of interest to me, what this money would not be used for, not necessarily what it would be used for. I have a number of opinions on things that it could be used for, and Ms. Prupus just went through a list that she emailed me. Some of the things I support, and I spoke to committee woman Lieberberg as well too, and she had a list of different things she wanted to do, and some of which I'm very encouraged about. Some are new ideas, fresh ideas about what we can do. Some fall within the existing phase 1, some fall within the likely phase 2, and some fall within what would have been phase 3. Many of which I support, and many of which I could get behind. But I asked Ms. Prupus and asked Ms. Lieberberg to assure me what the money wouldn't be used for, and that is this nearly $6 million on January 2 or thereafter. There could be a resolution if the money is sustained to rip up complete streets, and that would revert this town, phase 1, complete streets. At the end of the day, the taxpayers would look at a ripped up complete streets, which would be further impact on the merchants who complain about the first round of construction. But at the end, this town would have spent nearly $8 million to revert back to what it was before. And so for those who are new to town, looking at the tax structure, they'd come in and say, well, what happened over these last 4 years? One township committee passed ordinance sustaining more than $8 million in bonds. Subsequent committees voted to rip all that stuff, reverting us back to where we were before. And that, I would submit, all of you could come here and ask whether that's a prudent use of your tax dollars. And we would have to get lectured on that, and we'd have to bear those lectures, and I think they'd all be fair. So I factor all that into my thinking, and while I'm encouraged that Ms. Prupus and perhaps Ms. Lieberberg and maybe others will take the position that ripping up complete streets or getting rid of the bump outs or those kinds of things aren't in future plans, I am open to hearing what these other plans are. And Alex is right. This money doesn't disappear forever. The money can be recovered with a future township committee passing an ordinance. And if the proponents of that ordinance came to me and said, this is what we want to use it for, and I'm encouraged and agree with it, and it's sustainable, and there's a good plan, and there seems to be public support and a public will to support it, then I would get behind it. And so for all those in this audience, and perhaps all those watching this broadcast, the money doesn't disappear and complete street stays. Instead, there's a pause. And frankly, given that phase 1 of complete streets is barely a year old and certainly hasn't matured in the eyes of those observers who would come to town and learn whether complete streets has hurt merchants or not hurt merchants, And by the way, the public data supports that it hasn't hurt merchants because public parking is up. I know people refute some of that data, but it's hard data that really can't be challenged. Then we can revisit those issues in the future. And that's what I shared with Committee Person-elect Prupus and Committeewoman Lieberberg. And so I wanted to respond to those open issues raised by the proponents here today. Thank you.
I would like to respond.
Go ahead. Well, you can speak.
I can speak, thank you. Immediately what I'd say to Committeeman Levy is that parking may be up, but we have less shops in town, and that's a fact. We've had many shops have closed. In response to Mr. Wood, I think we do need to have our town attorney investigate by removing the funds. Do we also have to remove the project? I don't know if that's a valid point or something we need to investigate. I also want to thank the community who came out tonight. We're here a long time. We're not even finished with the meeting. It's because you care. You have cared for 3 years. And is it a mandate? Is it a Democratic blue wave? It is what it is. The committee has changed for a reason. Many reasons. There's many things going on in town. All of you have spoke. You want the funds to stay in place. You don't want a lame duck majority, minority, whatever, taking away the funds. We need to influence change. We need to work together. The mayor would not have brought this resolution tonight if she did not know she had the 3 votes. All I can say is I hope by all of you speaking, you have changed our votes in the past. We weren't going to fund the DMDA. You pleaded. Lieberberg and I decided we're going to give the DMDA a chance. Still in the air. I hope that your voices will be heard by Committeeman Levy. I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if the other 2 are willing to change their mind, but your voices should matter. You've elected us to be up here and do your bidding. We are trying really, really hard. So if your voices and your pleas and your suggestions mean anything, you'll see when the mayor calls for the vote.
Thank you. I too look forward very much to supporting some progress on Complete Streets for a review, to the extent that you believe a review is appropriate on what's been done. And I look forward to working with you guys on moving forward. So with that, we have 2 resolutions. The first one is Resolution 18-263, a resolution to, what is this one? To cancel $3.5 million of authorized capital improvement authorizations. So with that, do I have a motion to approve Resolution 18-263?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
May I have a roll call vote?
Mr. Levy?
Yes.
Ms. Lieberberg?
No.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Dahl-Eglow?
Strong no.
Mayor Burstein?
Yes. May I? Resolution 18-264, authorized cancellation of capital account fund balances in the amount of $2,368,107. Excuse me. Thank you.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Levy?
Yes.
Ms. Lieberberg?
No.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Dahl-Eglow?
Stronger no.
Mayor Burstein?
Yes.
Shame on you.
Boo!
Shame on you.
All right. Ordinances. We are in the process of doing business, people. Thank you. Ordinances 2515-18 and ordinance 2516-18. All right, why don't we, you know what, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break.
Yes. Okay.